on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply. Nathan Mayer Rothschild. Now, being born with the United States of America, many of us live in a very comfortable bubble. We're not too concerned about having a roof over our head, clothes to keep our body warm, or too concerned about where our next meal is going to come from. But what if I told you that you should be worried? That little comfortable bubble that you live in is simply just an illusion. Now, being born into the working lower and middle class United States of America, my immediate concern is the well-being of myself and my family. Now, after doing extensive research, I came across an article written by Jay Borowski titled 10 Reasons Why the Federal Reserve Act Should Be Abolished. It was written in 2012 and I found it on Framework's website, and I've come to the conclusion that there are many flaws with the Federal Reserve Act. What should be done about the Federal Reserve Act, you may ask? I believe that the Federal Reserve Act should be abolished as it is in direct violation of the basic principles that our Constitution was written upon, the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. In this speech that you're all about to hear, I'm going to demonstrate the foundation of the Federal Reserve Act, talk about the problems that arise with it, potential solutions to it, the practicality of these solutions working out, what you can do to make sure you're not affected by the Federal Reserve Act. Rules for the Federal Reserve Act. The Federal Reserve Act was created in 1913 as a reaction to the couple financial scares that the United States of America had come across. Now, the point of the Federal Reserve Act was to create a central bank which monitored the entire United States monetary system. This allowed for deficit spending as the central bank, aka the Federal Reserve, was allowed to print endless amounts of money to cover any federal debt that the federal government had, as well as banks. Now, what I also learned was that the Federal Reserve is privately owned, meaning that the individuals that run the Federal Reserve are not elected, but merely selected within the realms of the company. Lastly, I learned that the Federal Reserve Act allowed for the central bank to be separate from the government legislature. What this means is that it is in no part of any branch of government, and something such as the President of the United States of America can have no say on the actions of the Federal Reserve. Now that we have learned about the rules of the Federal Reserve, let's transition to the problems that arise with it. The first problem that arises with it is that it devalues currency. On Framework's website, I learned that the value of the dollar bill had decreased by 95% since 1913, hence when the Federal Reserve Act has been intact. A perfect example of this are these two graphs that are displayed on the slide. On the first one is a graph provided to me by Office of Energy, and this displays the price of gasoline over the years. On the right, we have a graph provided to us by DQYDJ, and this shows us the average median household income over the years. Now, in the 1970s, the price of gasoline, after it was adjusted for inflation, was about $1.72. In 2010, the average gas price rose to $3.62 after inflation, and this signified a 75% increase in the price of gasoline alone. Now, normally you'd think that as the price of materials went up, so did people's wages, but this was not the case. The median household income from 1970 to 2010 only increased by 11%. What this meant is that as the price of materials such as gasoline went up, people's wages were not going up by as much, and hence they had to pay more for basic necessities such as gasoline. Next, the following problem that arises with the Federal Reserve Act is that it's too powerful of a company with no checks and balances. The fact that a private company can own and make decisions for an entire country's monetary system already sounds a little too fishy. But not only are they a privately owned company, but they have no checks and balances. They are in no part a branch of the government and hence can act on their own personal agendas, meaning if the leaders of the Federal Reserve, if they owned any banks or are part of any banks, they can print as much money to bail out these banks. Lastly, it is unconstitutional. Like I stated before, it is in direct violation of the basic principles upon which our Constitution is written upon. The pursuit of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But not only that, there are about 30 powers that are granted to the United States federal government under the Constitution. Establishing a private bank is not one of them. So according to the information that I found on Investopedia's website, and using my own interpretation of the United States Constitution, I deem it unconstitutional and it should be abolished. Now that we have learned about the problems of the Federal Reserve, what are some potential solutions to it? The Federal Reserve Act. The first is plain and simple. Just abolish the Federal Reserve. Get rid of it. Prior to 1913, we never had a central bank such as the Federal Reserve, and we functioned perfectly without one. There were a couple of scares, but those scares never came into action. The next solution is to give more power to the executive agency, aka the Treasurer. Although we don't directly select who serves as the Treasurer, we select the President of the United States and vote upon him, and we trust his own knowledge and intuition to make the correct decision and appoint the right person for the job, which is a lot more democratic than having money decide who runs the financial servings of the country. Finally, we can switch to a gold standard. This seems like a great idea because establishing a gold standard can limit inflation and establish better, more stability into a powerful economy such as the United States of America. Now that we have identified potential solutions to the problems that the Federal Reserve Act provides, what are the practicality of these solutions? Well, like I had mentioned before, we work perfectly fine without a Federal Reserve, without the Federal Reserve prior to 1913. Many argue that the Federal Reserve led to major economic downfall, such as the Great Depression and Black Monday. Like I said before, we never had anything like that prior to 1913, so maybe getting rid of the Federal Reserve would not be such a bad idea. Next, the next solution was to give more power to the Treasury, and we've actually attempted this before. JFK's Executive Order of 11-110 stated that the Treasury of the United States of America had now power to print more silver certificates. What this meant that the Treasury of the United States of America had more authority and decisions to make within the monetary system of the United States of America, and took away some power from the Treasury of the United States, from the Federal Reserve, from the Federal Reserve of the United States of America. Now, kind of suspiciously, JFK was assassinated 5 months later, and whatever happened there is up for your own interpretation. Finally, the gold standard. Establishing a gold standard, honestly, right now is not practical, and due to the coronavirus pandemic. The Federal Reserve has already printed trillions of dollars in relief funds for those unemployed, and is only increasing the inflation rate by so much more. So, although the gold standard is not possible right now or not realistic, in the long run it is something that should be looked upon, as it is something that is very stable and could be worthwhile, worth the wait, the hustle, as well as the determination to make it happen. Now that we have looked at the practicality of these solutions, what can be done? What can we do in terms of taking action? On the grand scale, there's not much to do. These are very big fish to fry, and like Rothschild mentioned before, the person who owns all the money makes all the decisions. So on a grand scale, the best thing you can do is just to stay informed and continue to inform others. On a personal scale, you can save in land and valuables and not federal notes. What I mean by this is money loses value over time naturally because of inflation. And so instead of owning, let's say, keeping $100,000 in the bank, it would be better to own gold or perhaps even land. A perfect example of this was what happened in Venezuela. Venezuela experienced massive inflation rates, and due to this, something such as $100, $500, even $1,000 bill was worth seemingly nothing. And in this photo, we have a perfect example of that, where a purse is made out of multiple dollar bills, and that purse itself is worth more than the money that is used to make that purse. Now, to conclude, we've established the foundation of the Federal Reserve Act, the problems that arise with it, potential solutions to it, the practicality of those solutions working out, as well as what action can be taken to prevent you from being affected by the Federal Reserve Act. By having a better understanding of the monetary system within the United States of America, we can then have better control over our own future and better prepare ourselves for what is to come. Now, this quote by Henry Ford is one that I really like, and I believe that everyone should truly think about. It is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning.